this discussion is about entrepreneurship, which I find is a topic that's not often discussed in that context in the game industry. Execution Labs invests in startups and game studios specifically, which is quite a rare thing. You don't see many investors targeting games and game companies specifically. And when we do our interviews and due diligence on companies, one of the things we're looking for is entrepreneurship, that entrepreneurial spirit, within the founders, within the leaders of those studios. And it's just generally something that is lacking within most of the game companies we encounter, such that the games is very much driven by passion. And so we see oftentimes that companies are a byproduct of enabling that passion to occur, as opposed to something that those creators are genuinely interested in building. And so this kind of tension exists between an identity as a creator, as an artist, as a game developer, and then also sort of in tension with the notion of being an entrepreneur, a business person. And trying to parse that tension between those two identities is largely what we're going to talk about here today, and what that means and why entrepreneurship is so critical, and kind of finding the happy balance between being a starving artist versus a sellout. That there's a nice sort of balance between the two. And so we've collected a nice panel here of game industry entrepreneurs to share their wisdom and experiences. And we'll start by just kind of going down the line with a brief introduction of who you are and the studio. Thibaut gave, he named them, but we don't know their histories and stuff. So we'll just hear from each of them a brief biography. All right, Derk, go ahead.
All right. So I'm Derk, co-founder, CEO of Paladin Studios. I'm an art school dropout, so I can very much relate to what you're saying. That there's a balance between the artistic side and the entrepreneurial side. Currently, we've been around for 10 plus years, nearly 11 years, now with 30 people. So the balance is shifting a lot, and it's still something that I'm kind of figuring out. What is it? But we'll talk about that stuff in the panel itself. We're based in the Netherlands. We're doing mostly mobile games and try to stay as innovative and creative as possible.
Manuel.
Hi, I'm Manuel. I founded Abbey Games together with 3 other people in 2012. Up until now, we've created 2 PC strategy games, which we're selling through Steam. One of it, which is Reus, or Reyes, as people who don't speak Dutch pronounce it. And the other one is Renowned Explorers. We're focusing very much on having a deep gameplay experience. These games are premium games in the sense that you buy them rather than get them for free. And yeah, we're working out how to stay alive using Steam and other platforms to sell our games through.
So I'm Gaspar, and I'm the CEO of Abylight. And my partners founded the company in 2003. We all met at a previous company. 2 of my partners were already founders of Bit Managers, another developer in Spain, Barcelona. And I joined Abylight in 2008 as a consultant and made partner in 2010 and CEO in 2011. My background, however, is not a passionate artist or programmer or designer. I'm a lawyer. I am also a business degree and other stuff, but let's concentrate on that. So I come from a business background and still, though, trying to figure out how to make it.
Robin?
Yeah, so okay, my name is Robin, and I am one of the co-founders and CEO of Forgotten Key. We've been around for 5 years so far. We started out as students, so we had a few years, like 2 years. We had the company at the same time as we studied at university, and now it's been 3 years since. And we work with atmospheric adventures, so it's also premium games where we try to profile in the content of the game rather than the form of it or the business model. So we kind of we have the possibility to branch out in different areas. But at the moment we're working quite a lot with premium games, quite large games for small teams, and we work together with publishers mostly so far.
Excellent. All right, thank you. So, you know, it's interesting that we have some folks with more business background, others more with the artistic background. And so this is one of the things that we see, you know, when we're doing interviews with studios. Well, we rarely see someone that has a lawyer, you know, on the team directly, but it tends to be artists and programmers and designers who, as I mentioned before, wanted to create something and so built a company around that. And we have this term we call like who's wearing the suit. And while we don't expect anyone to actually be wearing a suit, you know, it's obviously a fairly casual industry. Someone needs to take on that role, and oftentimes no one does. Right, there's the programmer, the artist, designer, and someone maybe does the bookkeeping, and someone maybe deals with the lawyers, and no one really takes on that responsibility to be the, you know, the business leader or take on that role. And most of the time they'll say, well, it's just, I don't, you know, I'm an artist, I don't know business stuff, it's not natural to me, it's not innate, I never learned or did that. And so there's a question too of, you know, to what extent is entrepreneurship something you learn and sort of put on the suit, you know, figuratively, not so much literally, and sort of adopt that role versus saying, well, I'm just not naturally a business person, so I'm not even going to touch all that stuff. And so I guess for each of you, there's sort of a different story there, you know, from the art background. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that in terms of, you know, at what point did you realize you had to put the suit on and be the business leader?
Yeah, and so I dropped out, then I started Paladin together with a good friend of mine. And for years we were sort of, you know, both the suits and the artists, and we would pick up different roles. At some point the company got bigger and bigger, and when you reach like 10, 12 people, then, well, it just doesn't work anymore. So my co-founder left the company 5 years ago, and at that point I had to take over. And then I realized later that the decision to become the business person was actually made when I dropped out of art school and actually started the company. Because if I just wanted to make games, then I should have stuck to my guns there and just become a 3D animator, become a programmer, and work for a company, work in a company. And by starting your own company, that's the point where you actually make that decision. You just haven't realized it yet, maybe, and it took me 6-7 years to realize it. But yeah, it comes with necessity, absolutely.
All right. Manuel?
Yeah, I think it came in two parts for us. So we founded Abbey Games with the 4 of us out of university as well. All 4 of us were programmers, so definitely at that time not suits yet. During our first project, we were very much focused on our game, Reyes, and I think that was a good thing at that moment in time in the market. It seemed to be possible, or we got lucky that just focusing on the game for most of our time actually got us very far with the help of digital stores. But also our team grew. In the end, Reyes was created with, I think, 12 people. Most people were working part-time, so there was a lot of management involved. There were a lot of direction changes. There was a small office we had to run, and we had to move at some point. So all of us were distributing these tasks, so we sort of put on a jacket right there, but not the entire suit. That came only way later, I think, and at that point we thought we were wearing the suit. We thought, like, all of us are spending like 40% of their time on non-game development stuff, so we're definitely entrepreneurs here. We're only doing 60% of our time programming and designing and doing art. But only way later, like after we were almost done with our second project, which is, you know, half a year back, we realized that there were still a lot of like entrepreneurial properties, if you want to say it like that, or like a lot bigger part of the suit that we still had to put on. So yeah, I think we're still learning. I still don't think we're there.
Okay, good. Eva.
So in Abylight, what happened was that the same cases in Abbey games, it was founded by 4 programmers. However, they were very entrepreneurial, and Nacho, my partner, took on the role of CEO. However, he's always said that he was a crappy CEO where he is an awesome programmer. So when I came in the company and I stayed on, it was natural that this would be a transition for me to take on that role. And what I see a lot, and I try to communicate to the industry and other developers, startups mostly, is that they need to realize that if they are setting up a company, they need a person that is going to take on that role. And not only managing, which is also a mindset that one has to lead and the other has to listen somehow, and but also all the marketing stuff and all the stuff, that relationships, all those things that they don't want to do. They just want to do, we want to do games, but someone has to do that nasty thing to talk to people about them.
Is it really so nasty? But actually, Robin, before you get started, it's a really interesting point that Eva makes, that when you have studios that are started by the creative people, there is this sense of not wanting to relinquish control. Like, I'm going to hire a CEO, and then the CEO is going to tell us what to do, and we're the founders. And so I don't know if others specifically dealt with that issue, but maybe that's more if you're bringing someone from the outside to be like their boss, when in reality you're not giving up control of the company, you're just having someone sort of take on that responsibility. But, all right, Robin.
Yeah. Okay. So a bit more about my background is that I started out as a game design student, and then I was interested in project leading and did that quite a lot in the student projects that we made. And when we came to the point where we kind of needed to make the company work to be able to survive, it just came naturally that, okay, I take the biggest part in this. But we're still, like, most of the people in the studio are still co-owners, and we all have a bit of the suit, so to speak, where we try to sit down and we try to build structures and we try to build culture within the company that makes everyone do their best. So I'm not sure about all this, that we actually need like this strong leader man that has to say this and that and everyone's listening. I think it's for me it's much more about like sitting down, building a culture, building a structure which then lets people do their best. And of course, if that structure falls apart or someone, if there come up conflicts, etc., then it's good to have someone who says like, okay, this is the direction we should be taking. And to give that responsibility to someone is difficult for a startup company. We got stuck quite a long time, even after assigning CEO position to me, that we all felt like, oh, we want to be in control of what we do and we wanted to speak. And I think this is very common in startup studios, that you don't get to this point where you actually say that, okay, now we have to let go of some of the responsibility. And everyone has come to the conclusion that, yeah, this is a good idea, but it took some time. And I think it's worth pointing out very early that maybe you need someone to have like the last say in specific issues. Then you can divide that like responsibility in different areas to different people, but at least agree upon that first and then go further. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, so this kind of segues into the sort of next sort of topic area, which is the notion of building the company. Right? I mean, we've heard from several folks the idea of like building the studio and focusing on doing the things of building a business, and you know, we actually see it quite a bit again when we're interviewing or doing due diligence on studios. To what extent is everything they're doing about building the game and all the stuff around the game versus thinking about building culture and process and, you know, assigning roles within the studio, and then what that means in terms of building the business, and how the current game is, you know, one piece of a larger strategy or a larger puzzle that sort of plays into what the overall goals of the business are. And so, I mean, maybe you can continue, Robin, in terms of the notion of, you know, how much of the thinking is about building the business and thinking about that longer term strategy versus the game we're doing right now.
I mean, we recently started working a bit like with startup work with external board, etc., to get some external help with strategy work, and I think that's a good step for us, that we try to think much more about the future, not just the next project, but the next project and the next after that, and to see what we can do like from a profiling standpoint. But I think that we didn't come to the realization that we should really put that much attention on this issue until we actually sat down and worked with a larger project. that's when we realized, okay, we have these needs. We need to do something about this. This is problems where we can see time sinks. And if you can keep track of that, you can easily identify points in your organic structure that just arrives that you need to improve, and try to build upon that and try to assign roles that kind of
I mean, just as a side note to Robin's credit, I mean, I remember when we first met and he was pitching me the first game you were working on. Very beautiful game, interesting game. The next time we met, I don't know, it was maybe 6 months, or he was already talking about the other games that they had in the pipeline, even though the current game, the first game that I had seen, was still, I don't know, a year away. And I think this is particularly interesting because, one, as a potential investor or even a publishing partner, to realize that you're thinking ahead, that you don't just have this one cool idea, that you have multiple projects in the pipeline. Maybe I'm not interested in that first project because it's not the right platform or style, but the fact that you have these other games already that the team is thinking about and you're looking forward, then does sort of open up the discussions and opportunities. But all right, so anyone else want to comment on this kind of building a business, Derk?
It's so we have 3 to 4 projects running at the same time. So that's the first thing. I'm in the lucky, quote-unquote, position that I've been able to delegate most of the management of these projects to some really good product owners. That means that I can be almost completely hands-off. So I'm only a stakeholder in those projects. And for me, that was the difference between day and night of having my hands free, so to speak, to focus on the future and immediate future in terms of sales, but also the long-term future in terms of strategy and the type of the plan of action, right? How does everything connect in terms of the products that we make? What is the kind of the common ground there, and how can we kind of build momentum into a certain direction that can last for 50 years, basically. The other part, culture. Oh my goodness, it's so important. And that comes with hiring people. It comes with establishing what are your core values, reinforcing those core values, living them, making them visible in the work you do, in the interactions you have with the outside world. All those things are critical. Then there's the structure, the organization itself. We've gone from the consensus type structure that I think a lot of people start with in smaller studios, but we realized that when we grew to 15 to 20 people, we were just talking, and then nothing happened, right? No decisions were made. So I had to step up, and I had literally had a junior artist coming to me at one point, and she said, like, "Man, please take the lead. We need we need the CEO sometimes," and that basically taught me a lot of stuff as well. That yes, there needs to be someone taking the burden or the lead in all those decisions that need to be made, and especially the tough ones, and that requires headspace. So now we're working with an organizational structure called Holacracy, which is best of both worlds in terms of democratic approach, but also it has certain hierarchy elements to it as well when it comes to resources and the tough decisions where to put the money. That's so far so good. Very clear meeting structure, meeting rhythm. We have set meetings every week, every day that just recur, and now we're building that momentum also in the management of the company, and it means that it's easier for new people to get on board, and it's easier for the current teams to just do their thing. So yeah, super important. Like, possibly 80-90% of my time goes to that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and so there's a few things I want to follow up on. Depending how you're listening to things, you can almost sort of say, well, there's someone who will be the entrepreneur and take this leadership role, and please be the CEO, and all the rest of us don't have to worry about any of those things because someone's got the suit and he or she's going to take care of it. And
that's not how it works.
Yeah, well, and so I mean, certainly at a startup level, I mean, to what extent does an entrepreneurial spirit need to sort of permeate the whole team, the whole culture. I don't know if you've seen maybe that sort of tension, not just on an individual basis of starving artist versus a sellout, but that kind of tension that exists within the whole team, and to just say, okay, you wear the suit, allow everyone else to sort of pretend they can ignore.
It's driving people crazy because I involve them in a lot of these management things, and they have their projects to focus on as well. So it's a balance. But yeah, I'm a firm believer that if you join a small startup-ish studio with startup mentality, then you have to be an entrepreneur a little bit. And yeah, absolutely. But it's driving people crazy.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe Manuel can comment, because you were all programmers. I mean, to what extent did the rest of the team say, oh, we don't have to worry about being entrepreneurial? I mean, is that kind of what happened, or did everyone?
Well, I think we started a company together, so all of us had some level of entrepreneurship, as I believe it, because we wanted things to be in a certain way, and we wanted to make it in such a way. But of course, especially in a very young company, there are thousands of things you can improve, and they all have to do with in what way do I envision our company in the future. And at the beginning, we were all working very hard on how to get there, but it was just that we were solely focusing on how to build a great process for our single game, and how to make a space where people could work really hard, and how we could get an image on our screen, how to get a game that would really inspire people to get that. And we were thinking about marketing, and that's a lot of things, but we weren't yet aware of the higher level things, like building a culture or doing your HR with a focus on that, for example. But yeah, all of us were working towards some goals, but it was with our innate passion for games. It's easy to focus on certain things. So one of the realizations, because we actually didn't have a CEO until half a year back, and that's a couple of years in our studio, because at some point we realized whenever one of us is going to have some time on Sunday, they're going to work on the game, if they're going to do some work, and they're not going to work on the company per se. And we all thought, no, we can do this. With the four of us, we had brilliant conversations about where we envisioned our our studio a couple of years down the road. But after the conversation, nobody would actually work on that. Nobody would reserve their headspace for that that part of the company. I mean, that's very extremely put, but that's the way it worked somehow. So now we have one of us. It's not me. It's Maarten. He is actually the CEO right now, and he cannot work on the game. And we also put a producer in between him and the game team.
Not allowed.
Like you said, just to make sure that he can focus on things like retirement fund, that sort of stuff.
The important stuff.
Yeah,
No, we know.
From my experience and opinion is that even though there has to be someone that makes the decisions, the end decisions, it cannot be completely separated from the team, and it's work way better when they know what I'm doing, I know what they're doing, when we know what each other is doing, and we share that. That doesn't mean that the decisions are made by me at the end of the day. I take the responsibility, that's my role. But they know what is going on, and that creates an understanding and a support system. What was the word? Well, that. A company. Yeah, exactly. It's motivation. It's sharing a goal. It's not like employees and,
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the games in the sense of, when you have a company and a business and a longer term strategy. I mean, you talked a bit about sort of making hard decisions and, how all the pieces fit together. One of the things, again, we see is that the developers don't tend to think of their games as products. Right? They think of them as games. They don't think of them as a product that's entering a marketplace that has to find an audience and someone willing to pay for it, and they have to worry about marketing and all of these kinds of things and the business around the game. And I think this is one of the hardest things we see is having that entrepreneurial mindset, thinking about building the business, but then being sort of diligent about applying that then on a game-by-game basis, and how does each game sort of fit into that strategy. So maybe, Manuel, you can comment in terms of the transition you went from Rouse to the current game and some of the thoughts that went there in terms of it as a product.
Okay. Yeah, so like I said, with Reyes, we focus very much on like getting that game to be as good as possible. And like I said before as well, there's a lot of entrepreneurship involved in that. Like, how do you even predict what type of experience is going to appeal to people? But Renowned Explorers, we were definitely aware that we had to, that's their second project, that we had to go for a more long-term sustainable situation if we didn't want to work like Reyes, which was, you know, lots of over hours, very much stress on a lot of parts of the team. So from the start, we were thinking about a game that we could, you know, support for a longer while, a game that would have a community after launch, not just for the first month in which we would support it, a game that could be played for a longer while. So already we were thinking about way more about the user experience in the community emerging around that. So that was one big change that we made.
Good. Anyone else sort of comment on that and sort of how you think about the games as products as opposed to just the games? It's a tough one.
On tough decisions, because it's a creative product, you get a touch, and sometimes it's hard to let it go, and that happens. I mean, at the end of the day or the year, there's a lot of projects that don't come out the door, and that's a decision that has to be made, and someone has to do it.
A quick, our philosophy is basically that we're very good with the R&D part. So the development, the design, we do a lot of prototyping. We've completely optimized all the Scrum processes and everything. We pretty much suck at the marketing, publishing side of things, not just because we don't put a lot of focus on it, but actually also because we're small. And I think that for us, in terms of the strategy that we use, we deliberately say we're going to focus on development, and then we're going to partner with bigger companies who have a portfolio, a range of games, a bigger team that they can also use for benchmarking purposes, for figuring out that target audience. So, and we have to work with those publishers to make sure that we both serve the consumer market in the right way. So that's the strategic part that we kind of follow. So it's kind of sidestepping this whole issue. Other than that, we just do a lot of playtesting, a lot of focus groups, a lot of market research as well.
True, but at the same time, then there is the same sort of connection that's being made with the publishers, right? You're no longer marketing directly to the consumers, but you're trying to seduce a publisher, and then they, and you have to.
And that's just a lot of talking, talking. I go to one conference per month, and pretty much have between 10 and 30 meetings during one of those shows. And then I show everything we've got from the early stage prototypes to the late stage games. And I get as much feedback as I can, and that builds up it's like a proxy market research thing for me.
All right, cool. And we'll take questions from the audience shortly, so if you have questions for us, by all means. Robin, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I said we work with atmospheric adventures, and it's something that we kind of like defined partly philosophically when we did like bachelor theses and try to build upon that as a kind of type of game, a type of experience we want to convey to someone. But it has been also an ongoing discussion. What is this thing that we're making, and why do we do it? And if people even want these kind of games, but I think that we have a few different parts or a few different tools that we have been using to kind of identify if this is something that actually has some potential or not. So for Air, which is the current game we're making, we made a very small prototype, showed it to some people, got some feedback, and then immediately after we built a trailer for the game as we thought the game would be or look like when it was done, and released it on the internet. And immediately it was picked up by a lot of different places, and that was kind of a confirmation that, okay, this has potential, this is something that we can put some risk in. And I think building kind of like some different criteria, like building a strong visual identity, building on fantasies that are like resonates with people, or themes that resonate with people, and then try to build this into something that you can show to people and see if they actually like it or not, and then after that take that step where you put a lot of risk into that project.
Can I say one last thing? This is actually where the creative part and the business part are kind of combined. No, not clash. No
She's a lawyer.
Yeah, fair enough. But actually, that's the thing. That's where the rubber hits the road, right? The figuring out what is going to resonate with an audience. I think that's the creative part of the entrepreneurship. I personally enjoy that quite a bit, actually. So.
Cool.
Yeah, I just want to confirm that, because it's really easy, and we did it a few times, to make like a knee-jerk reaction and thinking like, we're not building our business enough. We're going to do something like create more strategy, have a meeting about what our culture is, and like really work on this abstract thing. But it only really works if you're in that really important middle ground where you're not thinking about your game directly, but you are thinking about the way customers interact with it and what like the appeal of that game is and how that fits your developers and your specific talent in your team. So that would be important advice, just not to make it too abstract and work on abstract things.
Right, and how does that sort of filter in terms of the creative decisions that you make and so on?
Yeah.
Excellent. Does anyone have any questions or sort of topic? I know it's a very sort of broad topic. If folks want to jump in, by all means. I think we have a microphone too. If you're welcome to address it to us in general, or if you want to ask to a specific panelist, by all means.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's a question in general that relates to this sort of a tension, or not tension, between on the one hand the creative side and the business side of things, being sunsetting your game, sort of quitting, pulling the plug. Which, as a creative person, it can be really hard, right? You've invested so much time and love and creativity into something, and if it just doesn't work in the market, there comes a point where you have to pull the plug. Now, this is a very difficult thing, right? Like, how do you decide whether it's going to work or not? So I was wondering, could you comment on this?
I think maybe Manuel, you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a cop-out here, because I think even though we're not really committing enough to like quitting a game, we're actually creating very large games, and I think one of both our problems and our strengths is that we can create strategy games of a big scope that is rarely seen in indie games, that we're creating original strategy games. But that also means that our projects are coming together really late. Like Reyes, which was a success commercially, only came together as a game design really late in the process. So it was really hard to judge it before like it was 70% done. And maybe that's a fault in our process, but I think that the type of games we make have that risk incorporated, that it's only when the sunk costs are really big, you can actually judge whether it's going to be a success. So in my case, I don't think it's super relevant, even though we should, perhaps make smaller projects at some point.
All right. Someone else want to?
Just a quick note, you mentioned sunk cost. I think that's the only way to look at it. So every euro you invest in the future should bring in more than €1 or dollar. And just disregard all the effort and the money that you put into it so far. Emotionally, that's the hardest thing to do ever. But that's the only sensible way to look at investments. So just my 2 cents there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, looking up the sort of sunk cost psychology will give you some sort of framework to understand how to parse that. If you're doing mobile games, it tends to be easier in the sense that it's so metrics driven, and you do the whole, you do a soft launch phase, and you can see, to what extent is the game, have the right retention ratios and so on. And if it's not performing well, you can sort of pull the plug then, and you're still kind of a ways from having fully invested. When you're doing premium games, it's much more difficult. I mean, you have options like early access, but then things just sort of tend to linger there. What we do see is newer tools like, for example, Square Enix Collective. Right, so this is primarily for premium games, and it's a free open platform where you can post your game, a bit like a Kickstarter campaign, but there's no funding, and people can sort of upvote and downvote the game and make comments, and so you can see to what extent you're gaining some degree of traction. I mean, Greenlight is another aspect of this. I mean, if you succeed on your Greenlight campaign, in a week, you probably have something good going on. If it takes you 3 months, 4 months, and you just sort of wallowing in the mud of Greenlight, you might want to take the hint that it's not necessarily a good game to pursue. And so I think if you're on your own trying to decide do we keep going or not, it's very difficult. Whereas if you're leveraging some of the tools and platforms and communities in order to garner external feedback as a form of validation, then you can make I mean, it's still an emotional decision, but you can make it at least based on some kind of numbers and metrics and so on. So, but yeah, being judicious about that, I think, is quite difficult.
And the emotional tool trick that I would recommend is to have a plan B always. So don't get hung up on one game only. Just always have multiple things like waiting, because then you can get excited about the next thing too.
Yeah. Right. All right. Go ahead.
Okay, so this obviously you have to have the proper amount of capital to do this, but say comparing a game studio to a Hollywood movie studio, there's a number of films that they figured out that a studio can put out and be profitable. So I think it's 17 or something, where 13 are going to lose a little money, one's going to be Titanic, and one's going to make a little money and they're going to be profitable. In your guys' experience, 4 different companies, and I know it's hard as a startup, you're maybe invested in one game or you don't really have enough money to be making 4, 5, 6 games at once, but for someone looking to, start a studio, I know it varies wildly. If you have a very elaborate game, you kind of have to roll the dice and build maybe one, and if it's a dud, I mean, what are you your company's dead in the water, or how do you guys balance having a slate so that you can give yourself a realistic chance at success?
For us, it's all about survival. So we have to survive if it's not a hit. That's the criteria that I run my studio on, and I don't take any revenue for granted coming from a game in the market. So yeah, that's the balance for us. But you roll the dice regardless, and it's like roulette. You can play once or you can play 50 times. The odds are still like 50-50, and in games it's more like 1 in 100. So yeah. I don't know.
I think for us at this point, it is a bit like you say, that there are a few games that are successful and actually like earn lots of money. But we as a quite small studio still are kind of part of, we're like one project for a larger publisher instead, who then the publisher kind of like bets on several different game projects, and if we succeed or not, then we at least got the funding for development, and we have a track record, which means that we have lots of experience, and then the next one might have a bigger chance of actually happening and earning money. But I also think that like an internal method or process where you try to figure out what a good game design is and how to convey it to people is also very important. So I mean, from our side, we haven't really scrapped that many projects late in development, but we have done that for a few. Let's come like to prototype stages, because we found that like these doesn't have anything that makes them really cool. They have some like basic idea that might be used in some other game later on, but yeah, so a method, and then just realize that if you're a startup where not that much fun, you're probably part of someone else's gamble rather than your own. Yeah.
Sorry, there's no magic number. There's a company that in their 50th game, they hit it big, but they could have died. Normally, the death ratio is very high in video games because you do a game, and what you have to do is to make enough money back so you can do the next one. And that's...
Sustainability.
Exactly, sustainability. Guarantees on success or lots of money, I don't know anything about
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we look towards when we make investments is the notion of sustainability, right? There's the idea of what's your long-term strategy, so it's not just the one game, but it's really about, does this game open the door for the next game? And I mean, obviously you have to like keep food on the table, so there's kind of a baseline of survivability there. But this is part of building the business and thinking about the kind of types of games you want to make and what your own roadmap looks like, so that even though game one may not succeed financially, it should somehow make game two easier, more likely to succeed, more likely to get a deal faster because it's using similar systems or tools. It may look completely different, but the underlying tech may be the same. And so you don't necessarily need game one to be a blockbuster in order to enable the company to kind of get into this sustainable cycle. I mean, the other approach is a bit the supercell model, and also kind of goes to the question about killing projects. You know, where when they started, they had multiple prototypes in the works. I don't know the exact number, but let's say a half dozen, and that's still how they operate, right? They have these cells that build small prototypes that have a kind of a gating process, and so they throw 6 prototypes into that gating process, and only one survives, and then that goes on to the next stage, and so it's a very kind of incremental approach to add risk and sort of you're kind of increasing your odds at the roulette table if that's even possible, but. It's just not the normal way. Normally, it's I've got my, we're a bunch of students, graduate. We have this awesome idea. It's all about building that idea, and it's do or die. And then you kind of backtrack a bit and say, oh wait, we're building a company. Let's put on the jacket. Let's try to build some sustainability in what we're doing. It's very rare to see people saying, well, we're going to build a company that's going to generate these kinds of games. So let's do 6 prototypes of those kinds of games, and then see which one can kind of advance and. Yeah, I mean, funding does become part of that, but even if you're bootstrapping, it's not hard.
We're doing it too. So we're doing these prototypes all the time, and I would say 90% of those get canceled. We don't continue with that. What we do actually is we have internal game jams every few months, and then people can just work on their crazy ideas, and if something kind of fits with the direction we're taking, then I show it to publishers. If there's interest, then we proceed. So we have a gating process that involves external reviews, basically.
So it sounds like it's safe to say whatever you're doing, you need to internally be every day very carefully watching the resources you're putting into development and be constantly thinking about, is this moving towards success, and always be willing to backtrack or pull the plug at any time.
Absolutely.
Agile and lean.
Yeah, and Lean Startup, there's a book called The Lean Startup, is a very good, I don't know if you've read it, but it has a nice sort of methodology of sort of testing something, having a concept, validating it, deciding whether to continue or not, has a nice sort of rigorous approach. Was there a question at the back? Or over here? Okay.
It sounds like all of you started as smaller teams and have since scaled up. I was wondering if you could comment on successes in the scaling process and perhaps some things that in retrospect you would have chosen to do differently if you could.
Go ahead.
So we grew from 10 people to roughly 30 in 1.5, 2 years. So it's been an interesting ride for me, for the whole studio actually. Gosh, it went very well actually. We had our growing pains, but the key part is hiring the right people. So you need to figure out what is your culture, not inventing it, but uncovering it, getting those core values in place, understanding them, living them, and then hiring based on those core values. If you only do that, then I think it's going to be a heck of a lot easier in terms of all the other stuff. Then there's the hard side, that's the process and the organizational side. I would advise to kind of formalize the roles and the accountabilities for each role. If you do only that, then I think you'll have an easier time as well. Ultimately, you do want a lot of engagement from the team itself, so there needs to be some thinking about the top-down, but also the bottom-up communications in the team. You're dealing with creative people. They know they're usually specialists in their field. Means that they know best what's good for their field. So there needs to be some voice going on. The other thing we did is we stuck to cells as well. So we have small scrum teams, like 8 people, and those operate fairly independently from each other. That makes it easier too. So that's the tips I have. Look at holacracy. I think that might be a good helping tool framework thing.
Any other thoughts on scaling?
Well, one thing, because we scaled from the first project to the second project, and one danger there was that we threw out a lot of good things about the first process that we didn't realize at that time that were good things. We only realized it after releasing the second project. And the way that worked was we were fully aware that the first project was way too amateuristic to be sustainable, the way we ran it. But we didn't pick it apart enough to realize what are the bad parts and what are the good parts. So when we started the second project, we changed a whole lot of things, and a lot of those things were for the better. But for example, we were becoming way more democratic, which opened up the creative process to a lot of people, which got us a lot of engagement by the team. But at that point, it was really hard to get like a single vision that we could really focus on, which was really the strength of pulling off Reyes, which was a large project with a complicated vision in a short time with a small, inexperienced team. So, you know, that's why we have to be really careful about what things you cut out, even though it feels like I'm killing my darling, so it should be good. It's probably good I'm killing my darling.
Any other thought? I mean, I guess you guys haven't quite done the scaling just yet. Oh, Derk, you want to add something?
Last comment, maybe. Just be mindful of small, making small changes is usually better than making big changes. So the smaller the change, the more smoothly it will go. So that's something I've learned the hard way.
Not really doing that much scaling, but I mean, when we started out at 3 people, now we're 6, 7 people. So it's, you know, a little bit at least. And for us, it's been good to add like 1 people, maybe each 3 to 6 months or something, just scale slowly to be able to integrate them into the team. And now we are at this point where we look at both like company culture and also like the processes, but we do that in the same way. We look at how has this been working out, what problems have we seen, and just like uncovering like the best kind of process for us, and that's also part of like the scaling, how to build a process and a method that kind of scales with a larger team size later on as well.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I mean, one of the things we see is that teams don't scale quick enough, or maybe quick is not the right word, but they hesitate to add team members, in part because they're worried about survivability and sustainability. But having too small of a team sometimes or often closes doors in terms of publishing partners and so on. They'll come and they say, that's a cool game. How big is the team? Oh, we're 5 people. Oh no, that you should be at least 20 people to deliver that kind of product, or whatever the number is. You know, because they just know through experience that there's no way 5 people are going to deliver that vision. And then, you know, there's funding issues and so on. But we often see the reverse, which is teams hesitate to add the headcount to scale up. Or, you know, they have 1 successful game and they can potentially do 2 games in parallel that address 2 different opportunities, but then they don't want to add the team because then they're worried about feeding those extra mouths. So it's definitely a challenge in the other direction as well. All right, so we're winding down on time. Maybe we can just get a final sort of tip or word of encouragement to all the would-be entrepreneurs and active entrepreneurs that, you know, maybe need a tip. Any sort of golden nugget?
There's a book called The E-Myth, which I highly recommend for any entrepreneur starting a game studio or having started a game studio. It's basically about entrepreneurship and the difference between working on your company and working in your company. Very interesting book, and it helped me a lot with figuring this stuff out. Other than that, just make awesome stuff, and that's that's the end goal, right? Or that's what you get judged on, and that's what brings in the money and creates the value in your company. So, with all the talk about entrepreneurship, that's great. But at the same time, the value is in the IP, in the games itself. So,
awesome. Okay.
Yeah, I would just say that to see everything as an experiment. Like if you're really positive about that one game that you're making and you're doing, everybody says you're doing the wrong thing. At least write down your own expectations in a most concrete manner, so that when you fail, you can and you survive, you can at least look at those expectations and see where you have to adjust them, rather than just say we failed. So everything is an experiment. The bigger the experiment, the bigger the risk, and you just should choose whether you want to do that. Because as a small studio, the bigger risk may make more sense.
So for me, the best tip is if you're starting a company, make sure that you have all the required roles. And in a video game company, that would be someone to take care of business, because world doesn't end in one game.
And my advice would be don't listen to all advices because every situation is individual, and you need to kind of find a solution that fits your team. And it's not the same for everyone, and it's not the same method, not the same process, but mostly the same mindset.
Excellent. Well, and maybe less of a tip and more of a thought. I mean, I think to echo a bit what Derk is saying, when we invest in games, while we definitely want to see teams that are entrepreneurial, you know, we also want to see things that are meaningful, innovative, creative. And so it's really about finding those studios and those developers that are that nice, nice hybrid between doing something with commercial intent, but at the same time with some kind of vision, some kind of meaningful aesthetic impact. And finding that sweet spot in the middle is rare, but is really what gets us most excited. And for those who are interested in funding, and maybe you in particular, there's a session, well, several sessions today on funding. There'll be one on indie funding models at 4:30 that I'll be on. And there's a Super Angels panel, I think, right after lunch. So thank you all for coming. Thanks to our panelists for sharing their insights. Have a good show.